We're talking country music, corporate career paths, and most importantly, courage, character, and the common bond of two brothers from Cabot, Vermont, here on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. I'm joined today by Tim Abbott, one of our regular guests and good friends of the show, and he's brought someone special along with him, his big brother, Dave. A familiar face and voice here in the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. We're excited to welcome back Tim and talk about his career in the cattle breeding business, as well as his current roles today with Showbox Sires. But we also get to learn about the elder Abbott brother, David, and hear about how he left that little farm in Vermont to eventually become the CEO of what was once Purina Mills, and to go on to lead other companies outside of the agricultural industry too. Whether you are just starting out in your career in the dairy industry, deciding your next step, this episode is for you. It is filled with inspiration, encouragement, and great leadership from David and Tim Abbott. This episode is sponsored by Uplevel Dairy Podcast founding partner Adisseo, a global leader in nutrition solutions and premier provider of rumen-protected methionine for dairy producers who want to optimize milk production, capture more value from components, and maintain the health of their high-performing herds. Feed is the greatest expense on any dairy operation, and don't you want to know how an adjustment to the ration will affect your bottom line? Adisseo empowers nutritionists to make informed ration balancing decisions with MilkPay.com. Customizable to your dairy's own data, this profitability calculator puts the power of real-time milk market information in the palm of your hand. Find out how much your latest ration change is really costing you with the free MilkPay app available on iOS and through MilkPay.com. Welcome back to the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. I have two very special guests with me here today. One guest is one who comes on and visits with us at least a few times a year, every few months. Tim Abbott, welcome back. How are you, Tim?
Thank you, Peggy. It's always good to be on your podcast and talk to your listeners. Looking forward to today's discussion.
I know you're looking forward to it because it's not just you on the show today. We are joined by your brother, Dave. And so we're going to get to Dave in just a moment here. But I want to have a little bit of fun in introducing him to our audience. So, Tim, I know you're a big country music fan. And if you could pick one country music song to describe your brother, Dave, to just help us all get to know him a little bit better before we hear from him himself, what would the song be?
I spent quite a bit of time last night worrying about this because I've gone from everything from coal miner's daughter to just out of jail. But since I'm going first, Peggy, I thought appropriate to give it some seriousness because he's going after me with this. And I think the dangers are too high for me to do anything other than be real. As you know, Peggy, I'm a big country music fan and follow a lot of musicians, but my favorite country song, and it may not describe Dave, but it describes his career, is a Travis Tritt song called Where Corn Don't Grow. And the reason I say that is because there's some lines in there that I think are so profound. And I think this podcast will be about leadership and success. And I think sometimes people don't understand how you get there. And I think Dave's career, my career, your career, Peggy, I think some of the words and the words that I'm not going to sing them, I'm just going to say them. But hard times are real. There's dusty fields no matter where you go. I think that's pretty profound. And then the other part that I like is that the weeds are high where corn don't grow. I think those two things lead us into our discussion pretty well. So I think if once you listen to what Dave's career or my career might have looked like, that there have been hard times, there have been struggles, but the bottom line is we still go back to where corn does grow, and that's agriculture. So that's probably way more tame than you thought it was going to be.
And on that note, officially, Dave, welcome to the Uplevel Dairy Podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you and to be with you, Peggy. And Tim as well.
And Tim as well. It's a mini family reunion, and I get to play referee for this mini family reunion today. And where corn don't grow. Okay, did you just let out a huge sigh of relief when Tim said that was his song of choice to describe you?
Yes, because I went through a lot of them last night and this morning as well. And I had the same thoughts that he did. We can either play nice or play dirty. And Tim, thanks for playing nice. It surprised me. I thought in turn I should pick one for him, Peggy. It's difficult because There are a number of them, and I too enjoy country music, and I go back a whole lot further than he does. But one of my favorite artists is Toby Keith, and Toby Keith has a lot of different songs that could work very well for Tim, and I know Tim knows a lot of his songs, but the one I picked was "I Should Have Been a Cowboy." And I searched high and low and tried to find different things with profound meanings. And when I listened to those words again, Tim, and thought about your affinity to country music and Nashville and, your really expensive boots you wear and, rubbing shoulders with all the musicians in Nashville and everyone and then I think about the horses that you and the girls and Sharon have owned. And then I know one of your favorite television shows forever is Gunsmoke. And the references to Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty are quite profound, I think. So, Tim, for you, it's "I Should Have Been a Cowboy."
Peggy, I'm frankly thrilled. I should be wearing it today, but Dave got me a shirt that said there's two kinds of people in the world. There's people that watch Gunsmoke and people that don't.
Oh, okay. I'm going to let you two in on a little secret that I'm pretty sure hardly anybody knows about me. I grew up on Gunsmoke.
Did you really?
Yes. So we already have a lot more in common here than even I realized, and that is the common tie of Gunsmoke. So you were very relieved by Dave's choice of a song for you. Did you have any thoughts in your head of what you guys were what the other would pick for you that you're glad they didn't?
Oh, Peggy, there were so many that I thought he could pick for me. The one thing about Dave and I, we have a great relationship, but we love to tug at each other a little bit. So I just had no idea where we were going, but boy, I did. I ran through a whole gamut myself.
So I'm gonna theme this conversation right now. This is cornfields and cowboys. All right. So, Tim, you have graced us with your presence here, and a lot of our listeners are familiar with you, but some of them maybe haven't had a chance to meet Dave. Dave, you've had your own career path that's also been very successful within the agriculture and dairy industry, but it's a little bit different, and it's a little bit further ahead of Tim's because you guys are about, how many years apart are the two of you?
I think Tim just turned 60. I think he's going to quit talking about me being that old, but I just a few days ago turned 74. So we have 14 years of difference between us.
Well, happy birthday. You said you just turned 74. Tim, you just turned 60 earlier last month, right? In March?
The end of March. That's right. So yeah, we both had big birthdays. That everyone gets to be a big birthday now, right?
So Dave, do you remember Tim as a little kid? Do you have that memory of being the big brother to the baby?
Tim was born when I was a sophomore in high school. There were four of us in the original batch, and each of us 2 years apart. And then 10 years after Diane, I guess we had a little family conference, and Mom said she was pregnant. And I'm going like, oh my gosh, Mom, I'm a sophomore in high school. How am I going to explain this to my friends? And that's my first memory of Tim. Honestly, I was gone, so I guess, Tim, when I left for college, you would have only been like 2 or 3 years old. So I'd come back for visits, but as soon as I got out of school, and I stayed in Burlington most of the time, I left Vermont, and Tim and I would get together maybe once a year, twice a year if we were lucky, but always we always talked a lot. But I have very few memories of him in person, being with him as a kid growing up.
So for you, Dave, you guys both grew up in the same place with deep dairy roots in Vermont, 14 years apart. So a little bit different timing that you were both students there at, what was the school? It was Cabot, right?
Oh, at Cabot High School, yes.
Two of the finest here from Cabot High School in Vermont that we have with us today. And Dave, take us back a little bit because you grew up in dairy, obviously, as we've talked about with Tim in the past as well, but you both pursued some different paths. And so for you, what path did you take? You're both kind of like these same tree, same roots, but you branched off into different directions. What direction did you go after you grab that diploma from Cabot High School in Vermont?
Well, first I'll correct you. You said we grew up on a dairy farm in Vermont. Only one of us actually grew up. We were both born and raised on the dairy farm in Vermont, but Tim is still in the process of growing up. But anyway, the path I chose, we were on a small farm, milking about 100 cows at the time, Jerseys. And my older brother was 2 years older. My younger brother was 2 years younger. Tim was joining the family, and then Jim came along a few years later, and I'm thinking, I don't think there's room enough for everybody here. And I wanted my aspirations were to get off the farm and get out of Vermont and see some different areas and experience some different things. So I went to UVM, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, but we're talking 50 plus years, I guess, Peggy. Went to UVM and graduated with a degree in agricultural economics in 1973. In 72, my junior year, I was chosen to be in an intern program with Ralston Purina Company from the University of Vermont. They chose one student from each of the agricultural schools across the country, and was fortunate enough to be chosen for that. It was about an 8-week program, and then when I graduated, they offered me a job, full-time job, in financial services as a trainee in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I took that job, loaded everything I owned into the trunk of my 1969 Dodge Dart, and headed for Harrisburg. And that's where it all began. I spent 26 years then with Purina, which turned into the division I was in was Purina Mills, which was the U.S. animal feed company or division, excluding dog and cat chows. We focused on everything else, the commercial animals, the hobby animals, the pigs and the chickens and the cows and the llamas and emus and earthworms and lab animals and all of that stuff, and had 50 or 60 plants across the country. And over the years, a lot of different jobs. I was fortunate enough to be given opportunities in different disciplines. So I started in financial services, switched into sales for a few years, and then was in marketing for a while, moving around the country. In 74, I'll go back while in Harrisburg, I married my high school sweetheart. So this year we'll celebrate our 51st anniversary. And she's been along this whole ride and moved. I think we moved 7 times. I know we moved 7 times in the first 13 years with Purina. So she was a trooper, and Christy and Greg joined us along the way, 2 kids, and she raised them in my absence a lot of the time, but it was a team effort. But 26 years, I went through different disciplines and then went into general management. They offered me a couple of positions that were very interesting. I was the vice president of sales. We had about 550 salespeople at the time, and that was my responsibility for a while. And just after that became Central Region Vice President, which was a general management job running the Central Region, which was a pretty significant part of our business. Became the Chief Operating Officer of Purina Mills. I guess that would have been around 1990 or thereabouts. And became president and CEO in 95, I guess. And in 1998, the company, which at that time was owned by a private equity firm, the Sterling Group out of Houston, Texas, we were sold to Koch Industries. They had an agricultural division, and they believed that we would be a good addition to their agricultural initiatives. So we were sold. I actually negotiated the sale, so I kind of knew what was happening and knew what was coming. That was in 1998, April, and within a couple of months, I was pretty certain that the new owner and I were not meant for each other. So at the end of 1998, I left the company and tried to figure out what I was going to do after 26 years in the animal feed business, animal nutrition business. I went to Ames, Iowa for a couple of years, joined a small startup.com company building web-enabled applications for the agri-food system. It was a great experience. I went from a company with 3,500 employees to a company with 12, I think, at the time I went to Ames, and had a lot of fun. Then the dot-com bubble burst. I guess it was around 2001, somewhere around there, and it was pretty obvious to me that it wasn't a long-term thing for me. So I hired my replacement, and I started working with the Sterling Group, the private equity company that had owned Purina Mills when we sold to Coke. Things were not totally dissimilar across different industries because I had the opportunity to work in Sterling Diagnostic Imaging, which was a medical imaging company. I spent time as the interim CEO of a flexible packaging company called Exopac. I spent a lot of time with CST Industries, a company that manufactured above ground storage tanks. I I had a lot of time with Dexter Axle Company, a company that manufactured axles, brakes, suspension, and running gears for RVs and trailers. And that was over a 20-year period of working as a senior advisor, I guess they call me, with the Sterling Group. And about 5 years ago, I decided it was time to focus more of my energy and time on fly fishing and tying flies and playing some golf and some other hobbies. At this age, I have to make room for doctor's appointments quite frequently too.
You've laid out this timeline of incredible opportunities that you say they were laid out in front of you, but you stepped into them and you were doing the work along the way that put you in that position to be qualified, capable, and to be able to say yes to those things. So whether that was the corporate career with Purina, as that company was really ramping up and growing over those 26 years with Purina, and then stepping into the .com space, and then into some different areas that really diversified the experience of industry, but at the core were very similar in what it required of you as a leader. And so to just take a moment and focus on that first 26-year stretch in a company that so many of us in this business are familiar with on the agriculture and on the dairy side, what was it about Purina that made you want to be a part of that company and that culture for a very big chunk of your career?
So it was an incredible company, founded by the Danforth family, William H. Danforth in St. Louis. They were good people, Christian people, strong faith, and laid a foundation in the company that was incredible in terms of how to take care of customers, how to treat one another as employees and counterparts. It was just an incredible company. But my first exposure to Purina, of course, we fed their products on the dairy farm back when I was a kid. And there was a plant in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, manufacturing plant. And I was always impressed with what I knew about the company just from being a customer, our dad being a customer. But then when I was in school, when I went to UVM, our parents weren't wealthy people. They were dairy farmers, and we had what we needed, and we weren't poor, but paying for college was difficult. So wasn't really sure how that was all going to work. Just out of the blue, I got a notification that I was the recipient of a $500 scholarship from Ralston Purina. And going back, when I graduated from high school, there's an award that maybe you've heard of, the Adisseo Award, which is a Ralston Purina award that is given to a graduating senior. I received that in high school. So I'm a firm believer that God has a plan for each of us, and it's a good plan. It's a plan to prosper us, not to harm us. And he obviously had a plan for me because the Adisseo Award, then the scholarship, and then the intern program, I think I was just meant to be there. And when I went to work for Purina, the thing that I liked so much about the company is they gave me opportunities to experience different things. So many companies that back then, if you joined a company in financial services, that was a silo and you stayed in financial services and worked your way up. I was given the opportunity to move across disciplines and to get a better feel for what goes on throughout the company instead of just one discipline. And I'm very thankful for that. And if there's anything that happened at Purina that prepared me for life after Purina, it was probably that, just being able to experience different areas without having a lot of experience in those areas. So I think that's where I learned to listen a lot and ask a lot of questions and remember that we got 2 ears and one mouth, and we should probably listen a lot more than we talk. I enjoyed the 26 years, great memories, a lot of good friends, and it was tough when I left. Obviously wasn't ready to quit working. So it was a tough time for a year, just trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up and what path to take next. But one door closes and another one opens, and it's all part of that plan that I'm still trying to figure out, but enjoying the ride along the way.
That's such a powerful story of what you experienced within that company and the culture, but also the opportunities that they gave you, and how even after the fact, when it was time for you to leave that position, it still meant a lot to you to look back at where you had come from. But I'm really curious, when you think about that time of just starting out as an intern or working your way up through the system and these different departments at Purina, was there one point in time where you realized that you wanted to lead that company at a higher level? When did you realize that your path was meant to take you to the CEO spot?
I guess I'm just hardwired with the need and the desire to be very involved, and I prefer to lead rather than follow. And I obviously started out and followed for a lot of years, and I still do, but I didn't know if that meant going to the top of the company. I didn't know what it really meant. But there's one thing that happened that I think it was around 1983. I was in St. Louis, and we spent a lot of years in St. Louis, about 17, I think, altogether, reporting to a vice president. At Purina, we had at least annual performance appraisals and career planning conferences. And I went in for my performance appraisal, I think it was in 1983 or thereabouts. And my boss said to me, he told me what a great job I had done and how I was so important and all of this stuff. And I ate it all up, and it made me feel pretty good, of course. And then he said, "So where do you see yourself 10 years from now?" And my answer was, "I think I can run this company someday." And he looked at me and he said, "I don't think that'll ever happen, Dave." And I said, "Why not?" And his answer was, and this is the truth, his answer was, "You don't act presidential enough." And it shocked me. But the thing that went through my mind at that time was, ooh, well, if that means I've got to act like you, I don't think I want to be president of the company. But what I had discovered up to that point, and is still true today, is with Dave Abbott, what you see is what you get. I can't be anything but what I am. And I took his comments as feedback and input, and everybody appreciates input and feedback. Some of it is meaningful and some of it is not. I pushed it aside, did my job, and just continued to believe. I continued to do what I thought was right and continued to be who I was, and didn't try to be someone else just because I wanted to get a position or a title.
What's the key takeaway for someone else from that experience of the choice you made to stay true to who you were, to continue to do the right things for the right reasons, and to not waver in knowing who you are and what was motivating you?
My message to young people, not just young people, anybody, is don't let anyone take away your hopes and your dreams. Don't let anyone rob you of what you want to be. Don't let anybody be so judgmental that they turn you in a different direction. Stay true to yourself, stay true to your dreams, and go for it. And for people in positions of authority that might be listeners, find ways to encourage and help people help your employees, help your peers achieve their goals and their aspirations. Support them. Don't take those away. That's my takeaway.
That's a very powerful takeaway. And I just thank you, David, for sharing with such vulnerability those challenges and those things that were said that were hurtful, but yet you chose different. And so, Tim, you have been sitting here so quietly, so quietly. But I want to invite you to jump in on our conversation here, because as Dave was describing his path, you were going about your own path in the dairy industry. And so for you, how did watching Big Brother Dave, 14 years ahead of you, how did watching him on his path influence you on your own?
I love hearing the stories. I've heard them before, but Peggy, part of the reason I wanted to do this is because of my pride in what Dave has done, but also, again, if we can mentor somebody to go into their careers as we have, maybe that'll be good. So for me, 14 years younger, I watched him go off to college. I watched him have success in his job and come home and tell the stories and travel the world. And I also watched Penny, who is a Cabot girl who grew up. We graduated in classes of 10 and 12 people. And for Penny to move to Harrisburg and Ottumwa, Iowa, and St. Louis, Missouri, like Sharon's done the same thing for me, but you can't underestimate that. Like it had to have been terrible at times for her. And I watched that and I've had to use it in my career. So whether it was family related things or career, Peggy, one of the great takeaways that Dave gave me, other than watching his success, when I was getting out of college, I was graduating from the University of Vermont. I was chosen because of Dave's connections at Purina to have a career at Purina. And I'll never forget, I interviewed with Dub Jones, and I interviewed with Ed McMillan and Bruce Baker and Ron Johnson and Duncan Highmark, anybody in the Purina family. Dave, I was 18 or 21 years old, Peggy, and I sat at a table with each of those people that were iconic in Purina leadership. And you want to talk about learn. I was scared to death doing the interviews. I remember one time I flew to St. Louis and sat down with a bunch of these vice presidents and directors of sales. I was scared to death, but I learned so much from that interview process about how Purina treated their workers, their co-workers, how they treated their customers, all just in the interview process. So Dave, one of the great gifts you gave me was that the connection to be interviewed. Now I chose not to go there to Purina because one Abbott in a room at a time is adequate. So I chose to go to a different room. But isn't that a great connection to what made me who I am today? You wouldn't think about going through a bunch of interviews, but it did. It changed who I was.
When you say that that was such a strong influence on you and a learning experience, what did you learn? How did it change you? How was it transformative for you as an 18-year-old young man sitting in that room, being exposed to those other leaders and that culture? How did it transform you, Tim?
Real easily. I mean, number one, they were all really fine people. They put their pants on the same way we all did, and they were very humble. They were very powerful in the company, but they didn't make you feel that way. It may have been because Dave was CEO at the time. They had to treat me nicely, but I really don't think that. I really think that what they taught me was no matter your position in leadership, you are who you are, as Dave, really well said by Dave today. But those guys, they taught me that talk to anybody. Don't be afraid to walk into a room and shake somebody's hand, look them in the eye, and talk to them. Because I'm not going to lie, I was scared. I was out of my element. It was intense, but it gave me great confidence to move forward and meet people, converse with people. And again, I go back to so many of their common themes were how they treated their workers, how they treated their customer, all those things that have been part of my focus in my 30 years in the business.
So, what's interesting about the two of you is we've been talking a lot about the path that you took, Dave. And Tim, your path then led you to a corporate career in the AI industry and then also to entrepreneurship where you are today. But I want you to speak for a moment to some of our listeners out there that are at that crux of deciding what to do with their next steps in life. So perhaps they're just coming out of high school. They're that 18-year-old Tim we were just talking about. Maybe they're just coming out of college. Maybe they're making a decision whether to leave the farm or to return from a professional career back to being a professional on the farm at home. You guys have been there and done these things. What is your advice to the young people today that are making those big decisions about their next professional move early on in their careers?
Yeah, that's deep. We could spend a whole podcast on that for sure. But I think, very simply put, at some point you have to really decide what drives you. Is it people leadership? Is it sales? Is it working with customers? I think maybe the number one driving factor has to be who you are. Do you want to lead a team underneath you, or do you want to just work with customers and help them? Do you want to develop new products? Do you want to go home and make your family farm better? You got to decide within what the heck you want. And then I think the key is, in my career, I'll bet Dave would say the same, meeting people. You've got to meet people that do things in every avenue you're considering. I chose not to go into the feed industry, but I sure as heck met a lot of people that I learned about it from. I chose to go into cattle breeding because that was more my passion. But Peggy, I think the takeaway is you need to meet people, and then you need to listen and observe.
So I'm going to stop right there before we get to you, Dave. Tim, you said two really important things here. You talked about the value of meeting people, which is exemplified through our conversation thus far, but you also said deciding who you are. And so who did you decide, Tim? Who did you decide you were?
Yeah, I might have been forced into it because I had a boss. When I wanted to buy St. Jacobs for ABS, he laughed at me and said, "That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. We don't need them, blah, blah, blah." And that's what drove me to take the jump to buy St. Jacobs with Sharon at that time. But I think I decided who I was at that point in my career because number one, I knew I couldn't leave Vermont while I had teenage daughters. And so I was at a point where my corporate career, I couldn't really run big businesses at ABS and live in Vermont. I'd had the conversation with my daughters about moving, and they were very supportive, but they said they hoped that I liked my new place in Madison when I moved to Wisconsin because they weren't leaving. So, Peggy, I don't know if I figured out who I was because I was forced, because I was smart enough to, but I think at that juncture, and then once I realized running my own business, doing my own thing without asking a board, without asking a series of bosses, there's something really powerful in that. And I think you've got to be wired for that. But now that I've done it, I could never go back. I like leading my own effort with my own vision, my own focus, word of the year. And I think those are the things that I've come away from leaving the corporate world. And I go back to my ABS career. They were fantastic to me. W.R. Grace owned ABS when I started. The training programs I got there were second to none. And I worked with the Bob Waltons, Dr. Bob Walton, one of the greatest people the cattle breeding world has ever seen. And I got to be alongside them. So my corporate days, like Dave's, when I left ABS, I was the same Dave. It was my family. I loved them. It took me some time to get over that. So it's been a fun progression of, I don't know if I figured it out or was led down that path, Peggy.
But that's where you really found your stride, was when you could step into, as you said, leading your own efforts. And so I'm going to turn that same question over to you, Dave. Who did you decide you were?
It just kind of evolved, I guess. But I'll go back to what Tim was talking about, your original question of advice for young people when they're graduating and trying to figure out what to do. And Tim hit the nail on the head. I'll say it a little different. And that is, find your passion and go for it. It may not be who you are, but what are you passionate about? What is it that you think is going to really motivate you and drive you? And number two, you got to be willing to take some risks. And I admire Tim and Sharon for what they did. I mean, for them to leave the comfort and safety of a corporate job, which I know very well, and put everything on the line. It was a bold step for them, and it required putting about everything they had on the line and believing in themselves to go forward. But at some point, you have to decide, are you a risk taker or not? And I watched what Tim and Sharon did, and obviously there was some risk in leaving Purina at the time I did and not knowing where I was going, but be willing to take a little bit of risk. And I think, too, I would say just be positive. We've got enough people that are wandering around angry at the world and not having fun. Find a passion and be positive about it. There are tough decisions that have to be made. There are people that have to be terminated. There are changes that have to be made with customer bases. All of that stuff is difficult, but those things can be done in a way that, I'll use the word kind because Tim Abbott did, are somewhat kind rather than mean, and part of the power thing. So find the passion and go for it. That's my recommendation.
You've been listening to Tim Abbott and Dave Abbott, two dairy farm brothers from Vermont who went on to do great things within the dairy industry here today on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. But as you can probably tell, there's a lot more to this conversation, so make sure to check out our next episode. We're going to pick up where we left off and hear more about tough decisions, taking risks, and what it takes to be successful as a CEO and a leader here on the Uplevel Dairy Podcast. Until next time, I'm Peggy Coffeen, and keep on growing, keep on learning, and up-leveling your dairy.